All right, welcome Euro students to your Unit 1 study guide. The two big topics that are covered here are the Renaissance and the Age of Exploration. So let's jump into it here. Let's talk just briefly about Europeans um, going across the Atlantic Ocean to the New World, conquering some of the civilizations there, such as the Aztecs and the Inca. And they were able to conquer these great civilizations because they had superior military technology. The horses was a huge deal, that a huge advantage they had over them militarily speaking, and the fact that especially Tenochtitlan didn't have an effective defense of their city. There's not walls. It's out there on Lake Texcoco. It was just too easy for the Spanish to get in there. But probably the most effective of all, of course, was the fact that natives weren't immune to the diseases brought over, such as smallpox and measles, brought by the Europeans. Um, when we talk about the Age of Exploration, you really kind of got to know the explorers. And really, the first explorer, we have Prince Henry setting up his navigational school, of course, but the first explorer we really talk about is from Portugal, and it's Bartolome Diaz. And he makes it to the tip of Africa. Basically, it shows how big Africa is, but it also shows that they can go around the Muslims and the Italians and establish a direct sea route to India to cut them out of trade. And 10 years after him, you get Da Gama, who does him one better and go ahead. He goes ahead and actually makes it to India. And Portugal's going to have to build. They're going to build forts all along the coastline of Africa to defend their ships from Spanish and other European countries, doing what they've done. It also protects them from natives as well. So the Portuguese forts that are built are very important. You get in this time period, commerce is booming. You start to get manufacturing making an appearance. Nothing like the Industrial Revolution, of course. We're not quite there yet, but you start seeing people make things. Instead of doing it in the cities under the leadership of guilds, you start seeing people moving their work out to the country. It's something called the putting out system, where a guy, he has all of his cloth and he takes it to the country and gives it to farmers' wives and has them make shirts and pants and stuff like that. Gets it away from the guild leadership, kind of like how some businesses have turned away from unions in modern times. Um, there's a lot of different economic centers in Europe throughout this time period of the Age of Exploration. Um, it's in Spain for a little bit. It'll work its way north and go to Antwerp. But by the early 17th century, it's going to settle in Amsterdam, which is in the Netherlands, Dutch, and mainly because the Dutch have become the principal merchants of the European world for a variety of reasons. Religious tolerance went a long ways. They invested a lot of money in their ships. They also were willing to kowtow to the Chinese in the Indian Ocean, and so they dominated in Indian Ocean trade at the expense of the English, who were much more snobbish when it came to that sort of thing. And so, Amsterdam really is the financial center of the time period. Another thing that happens in this time period that kind of pushes us on the road towards the Industrial Revolution is something called enclosure, which happened with the Enclosure Act. Basically, it was the fencing in of people's lands, which would help farmers protect their animals. They would graze in their lands. It was easier to tell whose land was what because there was a fence line running along it. So it also provided, security for their lands. The Age of Exploration was highlighted by the three G's: God, Glory, and Gold. And it was the Age of Exploration was initiated by the Portuguese first and the Spanish in competition. Spain didn't like seeing baby brother getting rich, and so they were going to get involved. Now, to do that, they had to take care of their own business in Spain. Spain had been dominated by the Muslims as Al Andalus, as it was called, for a long time. But under the unification of Ferdinand and Isabella, they were from two different major regions in Spain, which was broken up into these provinces. They unite their two provinces, which basically unites Spain in their marriage. So it was a political marriage, but a long lived one. And the two of them were both devout Catholics, and they would work very hard to expel the Jews and Muslims from their country. You basically had the option become Christian or leave. You know, in a lot of cases, people were tortured if they were suspected of being non-Christian under the Spanish Inquisition, of course. So there was fanatical Christians, Ferdinand and Isabella were, and they're going to unify Spain. And, you know, they're going to take a risk on Christopher Columbus, of course, and give him 3 ships. And it pays off handsomely, of course. We know the Spanish are going to come over and take over Native American places and exploit them of their labor and their precious metals, such as gold and silver. Now, the Renaissance, which means rebirth, happened in Italy. And there's really 3 big reasons why the Renaissance began in Italy. First off, Italy had more advanced cities than what else existed in Europe at the time. Secondly, they had wealthy merchants because of their positioning in the Mediterranean Ocean. They're buying from the Muslims and turning around and selling it to the rest of Europe. And 3, Greco-Roman culture. You know, they're surrounded by it. Even if it's in ruins, it's a reminder of better days gone by. And so the Renaissance is a rebirth of that Greco-Roman knowledge. It's people looking back at the ancients and saying, we should look at these guys a little bit more often. We should go after the world like they did. During the Renaissance, an idea emerged called humanism. And basically, humanism is just this scholarly study of the Greco-Roman cultures and the people that came from before. Humanism would, of course, move north where it became more religious. And Renaissance movement changes art tremendously. It gives us 3 dimensions and perspective in our art. You saw a lot of nudes painted. Yeah, there were a lot of portraits in Renaissance art. They loved either sculpting or painting mythological creatures from the Greeks and Romans. And of course, equestrian, the horses, they liked that. Those were, you know, the favorite topics of Renaissance art. England, now this is kind of bouncing around just a little bit, but England in the Age of Exploration, England once in, Spain and Portugal have led the show, but England, the Dutch, and the French are fast on their heels. And outfitting ships to go across the treacherous Atlantic Ocean is not for the faint of heart. And so England, they tend to colonize by the use of joint stock companies. The power of this is, let's say you have 5 investors investing at 20%. If a ship goes down, the investors, 5 of them, would be out 20%. If one person financed the entire voyage and it went down, they'd be out 100% of the investment. And so joint stock companies made sense, you know, and Jamestown was a joint stock company, a joint stock colony. Machiavelli also emerged in this time period. He too was from Italy. He was a victim of political intrigue, if you will. He was imprisoned for a while. You had all these competing states in Italy. You had your 5 big ones, but you also had other smaller ones. There were a lot of politics going on. So he writes his very famous book called The Prince, which is a political guidebook. It is harsh realism, if you will. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. If you should strive to be feared and loved, but if one cannot be both, then choose fear. And a lot of that is because of his perspective from what happened to him in his life. But it was very influential to a lot of the rulers of the time period. The European marriage system begins to change in this time period. People are getting married later in their mid to late 20s because they had to acquire land. And you had something called primogeniture going on, where the only person, when dad died, all of everything was left to his eldest son. And so the other children were left out on their own. They had to find a way to get their own land. You know, they had to be able to acquire land, or they had to go into the cities and learn a trade that would give them enough money to support a family that could live in the city. All right. So, you know, landowners for the farmers. And, you know, you got to be able to have a good job to support your family if you live in the city. There's some rural and urban differences there. The Medici family, famous out of Florence, a supposedly democratic republic in Italy. They were the puppet masters behind all of this. They got their wealth because they were bankers, the largest bank in Europe. They would eventually move into being, a couple of them would be popes and would acquire a lot of material wealth. But really, the political brokers of Europe for sure. Mercantilism rises in this time period. It becomes the economic theory of the day for Europeans. It presages capitalism. Some of the major ideas behind mercantilism were that you sell more than you buy if you're going to be a successful country, and that the wealth of nations was limited. There's only so much wealth you could have, so it had to be preserved. You couldn't give that wealth away. Colonies also helped this economic system. It made sense to have colonies in the New World. Those colonies would provide you with raw resources, and they would also provide you with a market. They would buy your goods, your finished products. So it worked well with mercantilism. And with all this stuff going on, you saw the price revolution emerge in this time period, thanks to this influx of all this Spanish gold and silver from the New World. You also had population growth, which was making food prices become inflated as well. And so, we kind of go through this price revolution because of that. Okay, that's it in a nutshell. Hopefully, you do a good job studying that, and you've been studying up to this point, and that this will help you on your AP exam. Wish you nothing but good luck, and I'll see you soon.